Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Veronica Koren and Robbie Snitkoff from Riskify.
I say, don't you know? You say you don't know. I say, take me out.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Veronica Koren.
And I'm Robbie Snitkoff.
We represent the Merchant Health Analytics team at Riskify. We've worked with many of you in this room over the past several years, and we're thrilled to speak with you today about the evolving world of fraud, risk detection, and mitigation.
Beyond the transaction, the shift to network intelligence refers to the need to look beyond the traditional method of viewing a single transaction in isolation to determine risk. In 2026, that method is no longer just insufficient, it's actually dangerous. Today, Veronica and I will talk through that shift and why it's so critical to success in today's modern fraud landscape. Now, before we dive in, we're going to do another quick live poll here. Everyone's already an expert at doing this. So please go ahead and pull out your phones and scan that QR code. We have such an incredible wealth of fraud experts and risk experts here today that we want to get a pulse check on how everyone's feeling about this topic. So the question we have for you today is, in the face of sophisticated modern fraud, which of the following presents the biggest challenge in distinguishing good customers from bad? And your choices are either fraud is hidden behind seemingly legitimate aged customer identities, for example, in the cases of account takeover, or lack of cross-merchant data points prevents seeing a coordinated fraud spike across the ecosystem, or are you seeing that attacks are leveraging Gen AI to create highly convincing and low-risk behaviors, for example, in situations like claims abuse and return abuse? It looks like everyone's finished. Let's see what we have. Okay, we still have a couple live orders coming. It's live orders. I'm in the right mindset. Live answers coming in. Okay, this is interesting. We have the majority of people saying that fraud is hidden behind seemingly legitimate aged customer identities, things like account takeovers. A pretty large percentage also saying that lack of cross-merchant data prevents seeing coordinated fraud spikes across the ecosystem. This is absolutely something we're seeing play out at Riskify across all of our merchants in all geographies, and we'll certainly dive into each one of these in more detail in the next few minutes.
Fraud is growing, but more importantly, it's evolving. We all know fraud is growing in scale, but that's the least interesting part of the story. What matters is that fraud is changing fundamentally. It is morphing beyond the legacy systems built to handle it. We aren't just dealing with more of the same. We are seeing a total shift in attacker behavior and sophistication. The problem isn't just the number of fraudsters, it's the very nature of the threat is outpacing the systems designed to detect it. And we're seeing this evolution defined by four critical themes. First, high sophistication attackers are hijacking legitimate customer signals. They are moving inside the perimeter, exploiting real identities to blend in with your good traffic.
Second, legacy red flags have simply become less dependable in identifying risk. Static blocks on things like mismatched billing and shipping addresses, temporary emails, and proxies are incredibly easy to evade. Fraudsters can now perfectly mirror the technical footprint of even your most trusted customers.
Third, this leads to higher success rates. The core takeaway, the problem isn't just volume, it's sophistication. So to stay a step ahead, we have to evolve our methods of detection and mitigation.
And if we don't, exploitation can be instantaneous. Automation has supercharged attack velocity, turning a single gap in your systems into a systemic breach in just seconds. The reason that we talk about sophistication and why it's such a massive problem today is simple. The barrier to entry has collapsed. In the past, running highly effective complex fraud took specialized knowledge, time, and infrastructure. But with the rise of generative AI, this has become incredibly simple. Sophisticated fraud tactics are now in the hands of everyone. Gen AI makes it easy to generate complex phishing flows, spin up scripts to manipulate customer success agents, run bots that manipulate customer success agents, and create synthetic identities at the drop of a hat. This all takes virtually no expertise. It's never been easier for someone to carry out complex fraud at scale.
High-quality machine learning tools are no longer reserved for elite hackers. AI has put them into the hands of everyone. This has created a dual-front threat which has blurred the line between professional crime and consumer misconduct. On the left, we have organized fraud. These fraudsters are more frequently using AI to industrialize traditional attack methods. It's never been easier to automate carding, ATO, and bot-driven surges. AI acts as a force multiplier for scale and technical evasion. And on the right, we have the rise of AI-driven policy abuse. This is a fundamental shift. Your own customers are using off-the-shelf AI in order to game the system. They aren't hackers, they're everyday users leveraging Gen AI in order to script perfectly worded refund requests, manipulate customer service agents, and exploit terms of service. The critical takeaway, whether it's a global crime ring or a single deceptive user, the technical gap has disappeared. Both are using the same sophisticated signals in order to hide in plain sight. And we can see how normalized this behavior has already become in shoppers. We recently polled 2,000 consumers about their use of large language models for assistance with their return and refund requests. Just look at this data. Nearly half of consumers are already using AI for assistance with their claims. That includes 30% who frequently use AI to draft or refine their claims, an additional 21% who use it occasionally. This means that you are now dealing with high-quality and AI-assisted claims. This is a fundamental shift. It changes the game for you, where it makes it even more difficult for you to make a decision as to whether to refund a customer and when. This challenge, however, does also present an opportunity. It's not just about blocking abusers, it's also about leveraging that intelligence in order to give you the power to reward your truly loyal and good customers as well.
New tools to democratize fraud are popping up every single day. These aren't tools that are being developed by crime syndicates. There are tools being generated by everyday people with the help of AI. At Riskified, we're lucky to have an incredible fraud insights team that scours the internet from the dark web to the light web and everything in between to surface these new sophisticated techniques and share them across our organization. Let's take a recent example highlighted by our fraud insights team in the form of BinX Labs and their temp mail and address jigger tools. With temp mail, you can spin up temporary email addresses that appear to be entirely legitimate on aged email domains. This allows fraudsters to avoid the old school use of burner emails. Using their address jigger tool, users can generate subtle variations in addresses to bypass velocity and duplication detection. It's allowing fraudsters to take a single identity and make it appear as if it's dozens or hundreds of unique customers. But of course, the sophistication doesn't stop there. With the BinX zip tool, you can target high-income areas with surgical precision. It provides median incomes, national rankings, and percentiles for every US zip code. It even includes a very handy map to find the most affluent areas within 10 to 50 miles of a drop location. This isn't fraudsters combing through databases, hoping for the best data points, plugging them in, and hoping that their orders get approved. This is fraudsters using a combination of analytics and AI to maximize their fraud ROI. Usage of these tools creates a legitimacy mask. Because the email addresses have real history and the addresses are obfuscated perfectly, risk detection systems often only see legitimacy. That makes fraud a repeatable and low-risk behavior for attackers. We see the address jigger tool here once again to emphasize the point. Automation is replacing manual effort. Those fraudsters no longer need to dig through those databases, plug and play, and hope for the best. They simply generate the variations, hit you all, the merchants, and are on their way. This is the industrialized version of the threats that we all used to face. I've spent the last few minutes now sharing just one example of how fraud has evolved, and it brings us to a critical realization. The goal is the same as ever, but the way the game is played is different. Fraudsters still want the same thing. They want that payout, but their playbook has been entirely rewritten. GenAI has lowered the barrier to entry, and attacks are now coordinated and executed at a lightning pace. The most significant shift is not who is committing the fraud. It's what fraud looks like today.
The customer isn't always who you think they are. Today, fraudsters aren't just breaking in, they're blending in. They are mimicking legitimate behavior, mixing in with your good data, and hiding in plain sight. As a result, fraud is no longer an isolated transaction-level problem. It's an identity problem. What may appear as a trusted returning user may in fact be a compromised or manipulated identity, or maybe it is a legitimate user engaging in new forms of abuse. This is where network-level intelligence becomes essential in order to see the full picture. Today, the fraudster is often a seemingly legitimate customer. They're coming with credentials that look perfect on paper and often leveraging compromised or spoofed identities. At Riskified, we're seeing activity among coordinated fraud rings shows a substantial shift from new to existing customers. Now, this doesn't mean that your customer base has gone rogue. It means that the bad actor is successfully masking themselves as a good customer. They are conducting fraud within the trust relationship you've already established with a valid customer, which is why your hard-earned local signals are failing.
There are three structural gaps that modern fraud is designed to exploit. First, behavioral shifts lack context and isolation. Your system may see a customer suddenly switch their device or ship to a new address, but what your system can't tell you is if that's a positive, negative, or neutral signal. Is it a loyal customer who's simply on vacation and they forgot to bring an item with them, so they're buying it from a unique location and sending it to a store nearby or shipping to their hotel? Or are they the victim of a high sophistication attack? Without understanding the larger behavioral and network context around that user, you're forced to guess. And guessing is what leads to false positives or missed fraud. Second, modern attackers love to spread their activity out across an industry with the hope of staying under the radar in one particular merchant in order to evade detection and operate indefinitely. Lastly, clean local signals can hide massive risk globally, and this is really the most dangerous gap. Everything you see from the IP to the device, to the billing and shipping address, even things like the user agent or the browser they're using may appear clean. But zooming out to a bird's eye view can reveal hidden dangers. For example, like that same device fingerprint being used on hundreds of attempts across merchants in the last hour. The point is that closing this gap isn't a function of simply better rules or more data. It's a function of perspective. This is what allows us to go from reactive risk detection to predictive risk detection and zoom out to view the full picture of a customer's actions.
Historically, the evolution of a fraud ring looked something like this. Smooth ramp-ups and fraudulent orders as vulnerabilities were tested and some successful pathways found, culminating in one last hurrah before the bad actor was ultimately shut down. It was smooth, gradual, and trendable, something that you could monitor and respond to over time as it evolved. Everyone here has, I'm sure, shared a view similar to this at some point in time with their internal stakeholders. But this is no longer the case. Increasingly today, fraud shows up as sudden concentrated spikes. And these aren't isolated incidents. This is still coordinated activity that hits fast, at scale, and often disappears just as quickly. This is a real example from a large travel merchant. And what you're seeing here isn't steady growth. It's a burst of activity where a fraud ring is able to test systems, exploit a vulnerability, and create significant exposure all within a very short window of time. That shift from gradual to spiky is critical. And when we look at high-scale events where a merchant undergoes over $30,000 of fraudulent attempts in under 6 hours, the data tells a chilling story. Throughout 2023 and much of 2024, these were one-off anomalies. But look at the trend from Q4 of 2024 onwards. We are seeing quadruple the frequency compared to prior years. The aha moment here is that these aren't just bigger attacks, they are compressed attacks. Fraudsters have figured out how to bypass the traditional slow and steady approach in order to hit your systems, extract maximum value, all before your team receives their first alert. This is no longer a slow leak, but a flash flood. Which brings us to the core challenge. If the fraudster looks exactly like a legitimate customer and they're exploiting your system faster than you can respond, how do you actually detect it?
The answer is that detection must move from viewing the single snapshot of a single transaction to focusing on the behavioral shift happening within the network. When a fraudster uses a real or seemingly real identity, all the local signals appear clean. The name, the address, the IP, the user agent, things like that. But what they can't convincingly replicate is the authentic pattern of a real customer. An authentic customer establishes a predictable digital life. A fraudster, even using a compromised account or a compromised identity, has a sequence of actions that's statistically abnormal. We recently saw exactly this play out in a widespread surge in fraud in the precious metals industry. The pattern here was characterized by device takeovers, where at first glance, all the local signals appeared entirely clean. The only abnormality was a very slight increase in transaction volume in a very short period of time. But given fluctuations in gold prices around this time, this wasn't a particularly worrisome event. A modest uptick in transactions, of course, is to be expected in times of high consumer demand. But here, the pattern was emerging simultaneously across a multitude of merchants and emerging at scale. It was the synchronization that revealed the truth. This was not organic customer behavior, it was coordinated fraud. With this behavior becoming more and more prevalent, it's become a critical focus point across our entire organization, from the product team to the engineering team to data science and beyond. So we've asked the critical question: how do you catch a bad actor who looks exactly like a legitimate customer? The answer hinges on 3 critical forces. First, you have to look at identity relationships. This is what unveils that mask of legitimacy that fraudsters love to hide behind. But with the vast number of sophisticated tools out there today and in the hands of everyday people, it's easier than ever for fraudsters to mimic and manipulate real customers. As a result, it's essential to layer in that wider behavioral and network context. This is what allows you to catch those subtle statistical variations that are the hallmarks of the modern fraudster. And especially with the rise of patterns involving real identities, I'm thinking things like phishing schemes, social engineering, mule attacks. It's critical to keep in mind that when orders come through from customers that are victims of those attacks, all their local signals are going to appear clean, because they are. It really is that customer sitting there placing the order. They're just the unwitting, unfortunate victim of a scam. This is the essential pivot from looking at a single narrow snapshot of a transaction to viewing the full movie of a customer's actions.
To make that behavior level intelligence work, you need data that extends far beyond your own site. This is what network scale delivers. Look at the growth of the Riskified network in just 1 year. We've tripled the number of identities in our identity graph. This scale translates into an immediate measurable advantage for you. 7 in 10 customers are already known to Riskified on day 1. What does that mean in practice? It means that when a new customer lands on your site, Riskified recognizes them and knows their legitimate history or their history of abuse from hundreds of other merchants globally. This level of insight is simply impossible to achieve when operating in a single merchant silo. The sheer volume and speed of modern fraud demands a network solution, because truly sophisticated detection only works at network scale.
And we've covered a lot of ground in the past 20 minutes or so, but if you can take away only one message from this session, let it be this. In today's landscape, the transaction is no longer the finish line. If we only look at a single transaction in isolation, it's like viewing one puzzle piece of a 1,000-piece landscape. Attackers have learned to play within the lines, perfectly disguising their orders, making everything look spotless. By the time a chargeback hits or a red flag has been raised, the attack has already succeeded and moved on. To defeat today's coordinated fraud, we have to connect the dots between devices, identities, and merchants in a way that no single standalone view can really provide. It allows you to spot the behavioral risk before it hits your bottom line. In the world of risk, the winners aren't the ones who approve the best transactions. It's the ones who see the patterns others miss. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of Ascend.